The wind rolled low across the valley that morning, dry and restless, the kind that carried dust like memory. Ethan Cole hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 days. He liked it that way. Silence didn't argue, and the land, his land, was honest in a way people rarely were. He rode the fence line just after dawn, the sun climbing pale and sharp over the Sangre de Cristo range. His sorrel gelding snorted clouds into the cold air, hooves drumming against hard earth. Spring run off had swollen the river beyond its banks, carving new scars through the pasture. Ethan reined toward it, muttering to himself, another week, another dam repair. He'd inherited the ranch 5 years earlier, after his father died, choking on his own bitterness. The old man had left him nothing but debt, worn tools, and a reputation that carried more suspicion than respect. The townsfolk of San Miguel called him the half-ghost rancher, the man who'd lost his wife to fever and buried his voice with her. Ethan never corrected them. Let them think what they liked. The prairie didn't care about gossip. As he reached the river bend, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something pale against the reeds. At first, he thought it was driftwood tangled in willow roots. Then the shape shifted. He froze in the saddle. A body. He swung down, boots crunching through frost-stiff grass. The water lapped softly against skin. For a heartbeat, he thought she was dead, the stillness too complete, the silence too wide. Then she coughed, a ragged sound that shattered the morning calm. Ethan dropped to his knees. It was a woman, young, maybe 20 at most, her skin bronze beneath the dirt and bruises. Her clothes were in tatters, a torn buckskin wrap, clinging to her shoulders, soaked and clinging like second skin. Dark hair fanned around her face, matted with river silt, and beneath the grime, her features. Apache. He glanced up and down the river, every muscle tight. If a patrol had seen her, or worse, if raiders had, this stretch could be crawling with trouble. Her eyes fluttered open, deep black, unfocused, but alive. Water, she whispered. He hesitated only a moment before lifting his canteen to her lips. She drank greedily. Coughing again, the sound small and human and unbearably fragile. Easy now, he murmured. Don't choke. She tried to sit, failed, and collapsed against him. Heat radiated from her skin. Despite the cold water, fever. Old instinct took over. Ethan wrapped his coat around her shoulders and looked toward the hills. The nearest town was 12 miles east. He couldn't take her there. Not looking like this. Not Apache. The last time a wounded native had been dragged into San Miguel, they'd hung him from a telegraph pole before sundown. He swore under his breath and scooped her up, feeling how light she was, like carrying smoke. His horse shifted uneasily as he climbed into the saddle, the girl limp in his arms. Hold on, he muttered, as if she could. They rode west, away from town, following a deer trail that wound through cottonwoods toward his ranch house. The sun rose higher, burning away the chill, but the girl's shivers didn't stop. By the time he reached the homestead, her breathing had turned shallow, her lips cracked with fever. Ethan kicked open the cabin door with his boot. The place was simple. One room, stone hearth, rough-hewn table, bed in the corner he hadn't shared with anyone in 5 years. He laid her there and stoked the fire high, stripping off his wet coat and hanging it by the flames. Up close, the damage was worse than he'd thought. Bruises along her ribs, a cut at her temple, wrists rubbed raw as though from bindings. Someone had beaten her, maybe worse. He forced the thought down. There were boundaries he didn't want his mind crossing. He found clean water and a rag, working methodically. Every scar told a story he didn't ask to hear. She stirred once, murmuring words in a language he only half understood, soft syllables like wind through pine needles. He recognized one, Alba, father. When she woke again, hours later, the cabin was filled with late morning light. Her eyes darted around, wide, uncertain. When she saw him, she jerked upright, pressing her back to the wall, breath quick with fear. Easy, Ethan said quietly, palms open. You're safe. You're at my ranch. Her gaze flicked to the rifle leaning by the door. He followed it and slowly turned the barrel toward the wall. See? Not gonna hurt you. She studied him in silence, chest rising and falling, every muscle still ready to bolt. He noted the lines of dirt on her arms where rope had bitten deep. Whoever she'd run from had meant mercy. "What's your name?" he asked. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, barely audible, "Taya?" He nodded. "I'm Ethan." Her lips parted as though tasting the sound. "Evan." "That's right." He motioned toward the bowl of water and bread on the table. "You need to eat something." She hesitated, then crawled forward cautiously, taking the bread with both hands. He could see the hunger trembling in her fingers as she tore it apart, swallowed, then looked up as if expecting punishment for it. He turned away, giving her the dignity of privacy. Outside, the wind carried the faint clang of the ranch's windmill, steady, indifferent, the sound of a life that kept going no matter who lived or died beneath it. When he returned to the table, she was watching him, the bowl empty. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Someone chasing you?" Her gaze dropped to her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "Soldiers." He felt the word like a spark on dry grass. "What soldiers?" She met his eyes. "The ones who took my village. They said they came for peace." "They lied." Ethan exhaled slowly. He'd ridden under the same flag once, long ago, before deserting after the massacre at Salt Creek. He'd told himself he'd been different, that he'd followed orders only to keep men alive, not to slaughter families. But deep down he knew the truth. In war, conscience was just another casualty. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Taya's fingers tightened on the crust of bread. "They burned our homes. My father tried to stop them. They beat him. Then they came for me." She stopped, breath trembling. He didn't press. There were some stories that didn't need full telling to be understood. After a moment, she looked up again. "You are not with them?" "No," he said. "Not anymore." That seemed to ease something in her. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "You saved me." He shook his head. "Just pulled you out of a river." Her eyes softened, a strange mix of innocence and comprehension that unsettled him more than her fear had. In that look, he saw recognition. Two people exiled in different ways, both carrying ghosts the world refused to bury. Outside, the sky had darkened with gathering clouds. Thunder muttered over the horizon. He moved to the window, scanning the trail. Old habits of caution returned. If soldiers were chasing her, they'd ride this direction eventually. "You can stay tonight," he said. "But if anyone comes asking, you hide, don't make a sound." She nodded once, trust offered like a fragile gift. By evening, the storm broke. Hard rain on the tin roof, wind howling through the cottonwoods. Ethan sat by the fire sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scrape soothing against the storm's chaos. Behind him, Taya slept under a blanket, her breathing slow, the fever finally easing. He told himself she'd be gone by morning, that it was safer that way. Yet when lightning flashed, he found himself glancing toward her form on the bed, making sure she was still there, still breathing. He didn't sleep much that night. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every flash of light-painted shadows he half expected to move. He sat through the hours with his rifle across his knees, listening to rain and memory. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean. Taya was awake, sitting cross-legged by the hearth, studying the embers. She had found one of his shirts and rolled sleeves above her elbows. It hung loose, swallowing her frame. For the first time, he saw color back in her cheeks. "Morning," he said, voice rough from sleeplessness. She looked up. "Your sky, it smells different after rain." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, it does." He poured coffee, handed her a cup. She sniffed it curiously, then tasted. Her expression shifted, surprise, then approval. "Bitter," she said, "but warm. Gets a man through the day." They ate in silence, an awkward peace settling between them. Ethan tried to focus on plans, how to get her somewhere safe, away from patrol routes, but her presence kept pulling him off balance. It wasn't attraction, not yet, but something deeper, the unease of caring again after years of keeping everyone at a distance. As they finished, she said quietly, "You live alone." He nodded. "Easier that way." "Easier," she echoed, then tilted her head. Or quieter? He looked at her, startled by the precision of her question. The line between the two had blurred so long ago he wasn't sure which was true anymore. Before he could answer, the dog barked outside, a sharp, warning bark. Ethan was on his feet instantly, hand on his revolver. He crossed the window. 2 riders were approaching the gate. Army hats glinted in the morning sun. He swore softly. Taya was already on her feet, eyes wide with fear. "Back room," he said quickly. "Go, and don't make a sound." She slipped through the curtain as he stepped onto the porch, the rifle resting casual in his arm. The riders pulled up, mud splattering from their horses. Both wore cavalry coats, dust-stained but unmistakable. One raised a hand. "Morning, mister. We're looking for a runaway. Apache woman, mid-20s, dangerous. You seen anything unusual?" Ethan leaned on the post, pretending nonchalance. "Only thing unusual is this weather. Ain't seen anyone out here." The soldier's gaze drifted past him toward the open doorway. "You live alone?" "That's right." The younger of the two spat tobacco into the mud. "Funny, trail led this way. Fresh prints by the river yesterday." Ethan shrugged. "Plenty of strays down by the river. Cattle, coyotes. Take your pick." The older soldier studied him, suspicion simmering. Rainwater dripped from his hat brim, streaking his face. Finally, he nodded. "All right, mister. But if you see anything or anyone, you let the fort know. Colonel doesn't take kindly to liars." Ethan forced a tight smile. "I'll keep that in mind." They turned their horses and rode off, mud spraying behind them. He waited until the dust settled before going inside. Taya stood behind the curtain, pale but steady. "They're gone," he said quietly. She exhaled shakily. "They will come again." "I know." He poured himself coffee, hands trembling slightly. He just lied to armed soldiers. Again, Taya moved closer to the fire, her face illuminated in its glow. When she spoke, her voice was soft but sure. "You risked much." Ethan met her gaze. Wouldn't be the first time. She studied him for a long moment, then said something that stopped him cold. "My father once said, a man's soul is measured by what he protects when no one is watching." The words hung in the quiet cabin like prayer or curse. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant echo of thunder. Hooves, maybe, or something worse. Ethan set his cup down slowly, listening. The sound grew clearer. More riders. More than 2 this time. He moved to the door, loading his rifle. The dog growled low. Taya stood behind him, one hand clutching his shirt, her eyes wide. He glanced at her once, then out toward the approaching dust trail. Whoever they weren't done searching. And as the sun climbed higher over the ridge, painting the desert gold, Ethan Cole realized quiet life he'd built was about to end. The dust lifted off the road like breath from a sleeping beast, slow at first, then steady, then certain. Ethan stood on the porch with the rifle loose in his hands, counting shapes through the glare. Not 2 riders this time. 6. Army coats, sun-bleached blue. One man at the front wore his hat brim pinned up, a veteran's affectation. They came at a trot that said, "We're not asking." "Back room," he said, voice low. Taya didn't move. She watched the riders approach, jaw set, a flicker of something old and iron behind her eyes. For a heartbeat, he wondered if she intended to bolt, to run for the cottonwoods and take her chances against horses and bullets. Then she slipped behind the curtain, without a sound. Ethan reached into the corner and nudged a loose plank aside with his boot, revealing a shallow crawl space cut into hard-packed earth. He'd dug it years ago to hide cash and winter provisions when the drought made men do desperate things. It wasn't much, but it was something. He pressed 2 fingers to his lips and tipped his chin toward the floor. Taya slid to her knees, gaze flicking once to his, then vanished into the dark. He dropped the plank gently into place, kicked a rag rug over it, and straightened just as a patrol swung into the yard. The lead rider reined up inches from the porch. He had a hard, freckled face and the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. "Morning," he said, voice flat. "You remember us?" "Storm washed out most of my memory," Ethan said easily. "What can I do for you, Sergeant?" "Lieutenant, The man corrected, chin lifting a fraction. Blackwood. He gestured lazily with a gloved hand. Behind him the others fanned out. 2 to the barn, 2 to the corral, one hanging back with a carbine across his knees. Ethan felt his pulse slow to a syrupy crawl. Blackwood. He'd heard the name in San Miguel, Fort Coronado's favorite tracker. If he was leading this detail, they were done asking polite questions. Blackwood's gaze drifted past Ethan's shoulder into the open doorway. We're looking for an Apache woman. Mid-20s. Took off 2 nights ago when a work detail went sour. He let the words hang, tasting Ethan's silence. You seen her? Ethan leaned a hip against the post, making a show of casual. Men come through sometimes. No women. Not in years. Blackwood's eyes amused themselves on the rifle stock at Ethan's elbow. He smiled, quick and unpleasant. Mind if we look around? Ethan knew the correct answer was yes. He also knew what happened to men who gave it. He stepped aside. Help yourself. Boots thudded on the porch. 2 soldiers brushed past him, smelling of sweat and saddle soap. They moved through the cabin like men who'd broken into rooms before. One threw open the trunk by the bed. Another kicked at the coals on the hearth, as if someone might be huddled there in the ash. Ethan felt the air stitch itself tighter with every casual violation. The young one, the same hot-headed trooper who'd spat in the yard yesterday, stalked toward the back curtain. He reached for it, and the dog snarled. Ethan's old cattle dog came out from under the table like a riled badger, lips peeled tight over worn teeth. Call him off, the kid snapped. Ethan whistled once. The dog settled, growling but obedient. The trooper twitched the curtain aside. Nothing behind it but a peg with an old shawl and the empty shelf where Ethan kept flour and lead shot. The kid frowned, raised on the scent of an argument he couldn't find. Blackwood drifted along the wall like smoke, pausing beside the washstand, his eyes lowered to the basin. Ethan's mind snagged. Was there water? Had Taya. But the basin sat dry as dust. Blackwood lifted a stray thread from the table, rolled it between finger and thumb, then flicked it away. He looked like a man listening to something only he could hear. Barn's clear. One of the soldiers called from outside. Corral 2. Water barrel? Blackwood asked. Full. New rope on the gate, sir. Blackwood nodded. His gaze slid past Ethan again, out toward the windmill, the cottonwoods, the river ribboning silver through the pasture. He tugged his reins, thoughtful. All right, Mr. Cole. If you see her, you'll let us know. If you say so. The lieutenant smiled without warmth. I do say so. He leaned closer, his voice lower, intimate and wrong. The colonel's interested in this one. Says she took something that belongs to him. Then maybe it wasn't his. Ethan said, a flicker, amusement or warning. It was hard to tell. Blackwood touched the brim of his hat. We'll keep in touch. They wheeled as one and rode out the way they'd come, dust hanging in their wake like a vow. Ethan didn't move until the last bay horse's tail vanished behind the rise. Then he exhaled, felt his legs again, and slipped inside. He shifted the rug, pried up the plank, and reached down. Taya's fingers caught his wrist, slender and trembling. He pulled her up into the sweet stink of air and smoke and coffee. She crouched for a moment to steady herself, then stood, one hand pressed to her ribs. Lieutenant Blackwood, Ethan said. Tracker. She nodded once, as if a name had merely confirmed something already true. Then her eyes swept the room, landing on the wash basin, the folded blanket, the quilts he'd tossed back in a hurry. She swallowed. Thank you. He shook his head. Not done yet. She crossed to the hearth and knelt, warming her hands. For a moment, the room held something like normal morning. The smell of embers and coffee, the thin whistle of wind at the door seam. Then Taya spoke, voice low. I left him. Ethan looked up. What? She stared into the coals. My brother. A child. The words came flat, unforgiving. We were running. He was small, could not keep silent. They would hear. I hid him in a willow cache by the river bend. She swallowed and didn't blink. I left him there before the rain. The breath went out of Ethan, as if punched from the back. How long? A night and a day. Then the storm. The storm that flooded the banks, that had nearly taken her life. He saw it then, what she'd been crawling toward when he found her lying in the reeds. Not escape, not a hiding place. She'd been trying to get back. Is he? He stopped, unable to finish the question. Alive, she said, and it wasn't hope so much as a command she'd issued to the universe. She lifted her chin. He must be. Ethan's eyes shifted to the window, the cottonwoods beyond. He pictured the bend where driftwood snagged after big water, the low bluff with the red clay face, the birds that nested under the shelf rock. He knew that river the way a man knows the lines of his palm. It gave and it took. He also knew the patrols would be combing the banks, exactly where a desperate girl might try to recover what she'd hidden. We're going, he said, already reaching for his coat. Taya stood. I will come. He hesitated. You can barely stand. I stand. He saw it then, the steel disguised by injuries and ragged cloth. The kind of wool that didn't bend, only hardened under weight. He pulled down an old wool serape from a peg and draped it around her shoulders. It had belonged to his wife once. He ignored the tug in his chest and fastened the toggle at her throat. She looked down at the fabric, then up at him. Puzzled, he kept moving, gathering what they'd need: rope, canteens, a bit of jerky, a small hatchet, his spare revolver. He held it out to her. You know how to use one? She studied the Colt with an unreadable expression. Then she took it in both hands, checking the cylinder with precise, practiced motions. The moment landed between them like a new truth. Who taught you? Ethan asked. My father, she said. What was he? Everything that mattered. The words were simple, the grief inside them not. She slid the revolver into the serape's fold with surety. He learned your weapons to keep our people alive. It did not save him. Ethan fastened his belt, throat tight. He'd never known the right words when death walked into a room and sat down. He didn't try now. Let's move. They cut crosslot through the pasture to avoid the main trail, keeping the cottonwoods between themselves and open ground. The morning felt freshly scrubbed, the sun cruelly bright after the storm. Every leaf seemed in high relief, every bird song too loud. The world looked washed and innocent. It wasn't. As they neared the river, the ground softened underfoot. Taya's steps were sure despite her exhaustion, as if the land itself steadied her. She stopped suddenly and crouched, palm hovering over a scuffed patch of wet earth. Boot prints, she whispered. Ethan saw them a beat later. The heel dent, the narrow toe, the way the mud had torn. Recent. He scanned the bank, the marks of a horse. Then another. Drag scars. The breath narrowed in his chest. Which way? He asked. She pointed downstream, but they did not go far. She touched the edge of a deep lunge in the mud. Here, they turned. He followed her finger. The tracks angled upslope toward the low bluff. Come on. They climbed the clay face, boots slipping, fingernails biting into soft dirt. At the top stood a tangle of willow. It looked like nothing at all, a snag the river had flung upward and abandoned. Taya dropped to her knees and pulled the branches apart with shaking hands. Inside, in a cradle of woven twigs slick with mud, lay a small bundle wrapped in a deer hide. Empty. A beat of sound broke out of her. Too small to be a cry. Too big to be swallowed. She reached in and lifted the hide as if weight might appear if she wished hard enough. Nothing. Only one thing remained. A beaded thong with round pebbles sewn into the center, smooth from being held 100 times. Taya pressed the thong to her mouth and breathed as if she might pull life through it like a straw. Her shoulders shook once. Then she set the bead carefully in her palm and looked to the ground, to the world, to the scant evidence a child's absence left behind. Ethan scanned the rim. Look. A man's boot had stamped the mud near the willow cache. Not military issue. Too narrow, with a flap repaired the inner heel. Beside it, a smaller print, a boy's bare foot. The toes had curled against the cold. Not soldiers, Ethan said. Who then? Taya's voice was brittle with panic. Could be anybody. Drifters. Settlers. Someone thought they found an abandoned child and... No, she said, conviction flaring like a match. He is not abandoned. I know, Ethan said quickly. I know. We'll find him. She closed her eyes once, briefly. When she opened them again, they were clear. He is 6. His name is Nantan. He is stubborn. A flicker of heat at the corner of her mouth. He will not cry for them. He will bite. Good, Ethan said. I like him already. They followed the prints along the rim. Twice they lost them where wine had dried the mud. Twice they found them again beside some scrub or stone. After a quarter mile, they picked up the marks of a small pony, unshod. A child would have been easier to carry on a saddle than in arms. The pony's tracks led away from the river toward a line of basalt outcrops where the land broke into gullies and shadowed cuts. Taya paused, head tilted, listening. Ethan listened too. Far off, a hawk screamed once. Closer, something else, a faint metallic jingle, the creak of leather, then a voice. A woman's voice, low, coaxing. He motioned Taya into a crouch and crept forward to the lip of a shallow wash. Below them, a small bay mare stood tied to a stunted juniper, tail flicking at flies. On a rock near the water sat an older woman in a faded calico dress, hair pulled back in a severe coil. Beside her stood a boy, small, wiry, dark eyes hot with defiance despite the dried tear tracks on his cheeks. Nantan. Relief and fury hit Ethan so hard he shook with it. The woman, late 30s, maybe 40, held out a tin cup to the boy. Drink, she said, not unkindly. Your new ma don't want you fainting. Taya's nails bit into the earth. Ethan's vision narrowed. A man came out of the shade, wiping his hands on a rag. He had the pinched look of someone who measured profit in ounces of other people's pain. Found some miracle, Ida, he said, grinning. You know what a boy like this'll fetch down in Las Cruces? Them families pay good money for a quiet Injun child. Civilize him. He chuckled at his own joke. We'll say we found him orphaned after the storm. We'll be heroes. Taya's breath tore. Ethan put a hand on her arm, steadying. Every part of him wanted to stand up and end it now. But the man had a pistol at his hip and the posture of someone who'd use it. And Taya had a brother to reach before she reached for vengeance. He leaned toward her, mouth near her ear. We go quiet. I take the man. You circle left, get the boy. On my word. She nodded once, a single tear cutting clean to the river silt on her face. He wiped it with his thumb without thinking. Her eyes met his, naked, desperate, strong. Something broke open in him at that look. A door that had been barred for so long he'd forgotten a room lay behind it. He slid to the right along the rim, counting his breaths. The wind shifted. The mare tossed her head, scented him, then settled again. The man turned to movement, squinting toward the wash. Ethan dropped flat. Below, the woman lifted the boy's chin. Drink, little one, she murmured. Lord knows what they'd have done to you if we hadn't come along. Nandan slapped the cup away. It clattered against stone, water splashing the hem of her dress. I have a mother, he said fiercely. She is coming. The woman's mouth thinned. The man's hand went to his pistol. Ethan rose. It happened fast and then very slow. He came over the rim like a shadow falling, rifle leveled, voice calm as winter. Don't, he said to the man. Just don't. The man froze, hand inches from the grip. The woman gasped, grabbing for the boy's shoulder. Nantan twisted free and bolted, straight toward the juniper where the mare stood tied. From the left, a blur of movement, Taya swept down the bank with the river's own speed, snatching her brother to her chest. Nantan, she breathed. The boy clung with both arms, making a sound that was part sob, part victory. The man's eyes ticked from Ethan's rifle to the siblings and back again, calculating angles too slowly. Now hold on, he said, tone oily. We was only... Say your next words careful, Ethan advised, the barrel steady. Your life will weigh them. The woman's hands rose, palms out, eyes wide. We didn't know he had folks. We just... Thought you'd make $1 off a storm, Ethan said. Her face crumpled, not from shame, he realized, but from the loss of the lies she'd told herself, that some taking was a kind of rescue. He'd seen that look before over cattle, water, land. The West turned people into its own kind of killer. Unhitch the mare, he said. Back away. Slow. They did. Taya had her brother in both arms, his face buried in her neck, his small fingers digging into her shoulders. Ethan's throat went tight again. He knew what it was to get back something you'd steeled yourself to live without. The man watched opportunities slide away and couldn't stand it. His hand darted for the pistol. Ethan's rifle barked once, loud enough to shove the ravine's silence back 3 paces. The bullet hit the ground in front of the man's boot, spitting rock into his shins. The man yelped and hopped back, eyes wide around the edges. All right. Leave the gun, Ethan said. Go. They stumbled up the gully, scrambling like beetles, not daring to look back. Ethan kept the rifle trained until they crested the ridge and ran crooked into the brush, cursing and tripping over their own greed. He lowered the barrel and turned. Nantan was staring at him from the shelter of his sister's arms, dark eyes measuring, wary. Ethan crouched, rifle resting across his knees. You bite. The boy's chin lifted. Hard. Good, Ethan said, and the corner of Taya's mouth twitched again despite the tears drying on her cheeks. She set Nantan down gently, both hands on his shoulders. Show me, she whispered. He spread his arms. No bruises beyond what the storm had given him. No blood. His soles were cut and tender. She cradled his foot in her hand as if it were all of him. I thought, she couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Ethan looked away and pretended to study the sky. When he looked back, Taya was tying the boy's beaded thong around his neck. He touched it reverently, like a banner he'd marched under without surrender. We go home now, he asked. At that word, home, something inside Ethan shifted again. What did it mean to people who'd had theirs burned, to a man who lived in a house that felt more like a grave lantern than shelter? Taya looked at Ethan over Nanton's head. The gratitude there wasn't grand. It was simple and true, the kind that felt like weight in a man's palms. Thank you, she said. He cleared his throat. We're not done. A shadow moved across the ravine, then another. Ethan's head snapped up. Not clouds. Horses. He grabbed the boy's shoulder and pushed him back behind Taya, stepping forward himself, rifle raised. The first rider appeared on the rim above them, silhouette knife-sharp against blue. Cavalry hat. Carbine leveled. On the ridge to the right. Another. Behind them. 3 more. They'd come quiet, like men who knew how to move the way trouble moved. The lead rider's voice dropped into the wash, too calm. Set the rifle down, Mr. Cole. Blackwood. He looked larger from above, like the land itself had added inches to him. Sun lit his eyes beneath the brim. 2 cold coins. You're on my ranch, Ethan said, every word measured. And you're harboring fugitives, Blackwood replied. His carbine did not waver. By order of Colonel Hale, you will lower your weapon, surrender the Apache woman and boy, and present yourself for arrest. Taya's breath shivered against the quiet. Nanton's fingers tightened in the serape. Ethan could feel their fear behind him, bright and hot. He could also feel something else, his own choice arriving, not tomorrow, not after a drink, not with time enough to make it clean. Now. Colonel Hale's orders don't run my soul, Ethan said. Blackwood's mouth turned like a man amused at his own funeral. Your soul won't matter if you die on a charge of treason. Maybe, Ethan said. The ravine seemed to hold its breath. A cicada started in the grass, and then thought better of it. Far off, the windmill clicked once, twice, counting seconds like a judge's gavel. Last chance, Blackwood said softly. Set it down. Ethan did not move. Something bright and fierce stood up inside him. A man he'd been once, or might have been, or still could be. He slid 1 boot forward into the dust, anchoring. His fingers steadied on the trigger. He didn't raise the barrel any higher. He didn't need to. The next moment would turn the rest of his life. Behind him, Taya whispered something in her language, a string of syllables that sounded like a promise more than a prayer. When she switched to English, her voice was steady as bedrock. Ethan, she said, If they take me, do not let them take my brother. Blackwood's carbine ticked as he took up slack on the trigger. Ethan exhaled once. I won't. Then a shout ripped down the gully from the left. Another patrol crashing through sage that should have been empty. A horse screamed. Someone fired too soon. The sound slammed off stone, and the ravine exploded into motion. Ethan swung, deciding as he moved, and the screen went white with dust and gunfire. The echo of gunfire rolled to the canyon. Thunder chasing thunder. Dust boiled from the clay walls, swallowing everything in a gray haze. Ethan dropped to one knee behind a boulder, racking the rifle's lever, eyes scanning for Taya and Nantan through the swirling grit. Taya, he shouted. No answer. Only the rasp of a ricocheting lead and the grunt of a dying horse. Then a voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Hold fire. Hold your fire. It was Blackwood. He reined his horse to the ridge's edge, dust coating his face. You're surrounded. Cole. No need to die for a squaw and her brat. Ethan's jaw clenched. He could see two soldiers trying to flank from the left, one reloading, the other shouting orders. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He shifted position, waited for the first silhouette to break cover, and fired. The soldier dropped, rolling down the slope in a spill of loose dirt. For a heartbeat, silence. Then held open again. Taya crawled out from behind a low ledge, dragging Nantan under her body. Ethan, she gasped, we cannot stay here. I know, he barked, pulling her behind the rock. He looked over the ridge. 20 feet down, the river curved, swollen and fast moraine. We've got one chance. Taya followed his gaze. Her eyes widened. The water can carry us farther than their bullets. She didn't argue. That was one thing about her. Fear never froze her. He turned to Nantan. The boy's face was streaked with mud and defiance. Ethan gripped his small shoulders. Listen to me, son. You hold on to your sister and don't let go, no matter what. The boy nodded, jaw set like stone. Ethan slung his rifle, grabbed the serape from Taya's shoulders, and tore it into strips. He tied one end around his waist and the other around hers. You let go, I drag you back. And if you let go, she asked quietly. He met her eyes. Then you'll know I'm dead. Before she could answer, another shot rang out, inches from their cover. Rock splintered, dirt flying into his face. Go! Ethan shouted. They broke from cover at a sprint. 3 bodies cutting through sunlight and smoke. Bullets whipped past like angry bees. Ethan felt one graze his sleeve, another hiss by his ear. The sound of the river grew louder, a wild, living roar. They reached the edge. For half a second, the world hung still. The wind in their faces, the smell of gunpowder and rain. Blackwood shout, turning distant. And then they leapt. The plunge knocked the air out of him. Cold water slammed like a hammer. The current took them instantly, dragging them downstream, spinning and choking. He caught a glimpse of Taya, her arm around Nantan, her mouth barely above the surface. He kicked toward them, pulling against the rope that bound them. The river was all teeth and muscle, snatching them over rocks and through foam. Then darkness. He didn't know how long he was out. When he woke, the world was quiet again, the sky a pale wash overhead. His body ached from shoulder to shin. Something moved beside him. Taya, coughing water from her lungs, one arm still locked around her brother. The serape rope stretched taut between them, frayed but holding. Still with me? Ethan croaked. Taya looked at him through wet hair, eyes shining with exhaustion and something like disbelief. Still. Nantan sat up, shivering. They gone. Ethan nodded slowly. For now. They had washed miles downstream. The canyon walls had flattened into rolling plains, the air thick with the smell of wet grass and cottonwood bark. His hat was gone, his rifle too, but they were alive. He pushed his feet, every muscle screaming, and scanned the horizon. No dust, no riders. Just the hush that follows violence. The kind that makes you wonder if the world holding its breath or if you've gone deaf to it. Taya stood unsteadily, still clutching Nantan's hand. Where do we go now? Ethan looked west toward the faint smudge of blue hills. There's a ridge beyond those. Old mining tunnels. If we can make it before dark, we can hole up till the search burns out. Taya studied him, and after, he rubbed a hand over his jaw. After we figure out. She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded. They walked. Hours passed under a sun that seemed determined to punish survival. The land stretched endless, blistered gold and gray. The boy faltered first. Ethan hoisted him up without a word and carried him on his back. Taya limped beside him, refusing to slow. Her bare feet were torn, her face streaked with dust and sweat. At dusk, they reached the ridge. The mine shaft yawned dark against the rock, an old silver tunnel abandoned decades ago. Ethan checked inside, empty except for a few bats and the smell of iron and rot. It would do. They built a small fire from dry scrub, the flames throwing light across their faces. For the first time since the river, Ethan let himself breathe. He looked at the two of them, this woman and boy who'd landed in his life like a storm, and wondered how much longer he could keep them safe. Taya sat across from him, Nantan asleep in her lap. She watched the fire with a faraway look, fingers absently tracing the boy's hair. "You never told me," Ethan said quietly, "why they wanted you. The soldiers." She hesitated, then reached into a fold of her soaked serape and drew out a small leather pouch. She opened it carefully, revealing a bundle of dried leaves and roots. "My father's medicine," she said, "for the fever. He found a cure from the white willow and another plant that grows only near warm springs. It saved many in our village. But when the soldiers came, they wanted it for themselves, to trade, to sell. He refused. And they killed him," Ethan finished, voice rough. She nodded. "They think I remember the recipe. I only remember enough to heal, not enough to sell." She looked up, firelight painting her eyes gold. "Colonel Hale, he wants what he cannot understand." Ethan stared into flames. "And now he'll want you dead because you ran." "Yes," she said simply. Silence settled. Outside, the night wind whispered to the rocks, carrying distant sounds. Maybe coyotes, maybe something worse. After a while, Taya spoke again. "Why did you help me?" Ethan looked across the fire, unable to hold her gaze for long. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because no one helped me when I needed it." She tilted her head. "Who did not help you?" He hesitated, then sighed. "My wife. The fever took her. The doctor in town wouldn't come. Said it was Indian sickness. Thought it might spread. So I buried her myself." Taya's face softened, pain mirroring pain. "Then you understand," she whispered. He nodded. "More than I'd like." They sat in the quiet hum of fire and grief until exhaustion claimed them one by one. Ethan took the first watch, rifle across his knees, an old habit he couldn't break. The stars above looked close enough to touch. Somewhere out there, he knew, Blackwood was still hunting. The next morning came cold and pale. They were breaking camp when Ethan heard it. The far-off whinny of a horse. Too distant to see, but close enough to chill his gut. He scanned the horizon. "We move." They crossed the valley quickly, keeping low through scrub and sage. The boy was quiet now, eyes darting everywhere. By midday, they reached a cluster of rocky outcrops that hid a narrow canyon. It wasn't much, but it gave cover. Ethan crouched at the entrance, listening. Hoofbeats. Closed now. He could count 3 horses. Then a voice. "Blackwood. Fan out. They can't have gone far." Ethan grabbed Taya's hand and pulled her deeper into the shadows. They moved fast and silent until the canyon narrowed into a dead end, nothing but stone and sky. He turned, breathing hard. No way out. Taya looked upward, scanning the wall. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow ledge halfway up. He followed her gaze, barely a foot wide, but it might hold. "You climb first," he said, boosting Nantan into her arms. She climbed like someone who'd been raised by the land itself. Bare feet, finding holds where there seemed none. She reached the ledge, set Nantan above, and turned to reach for Ethan's hand. The hoofbeats drew closer. Voices echoed off the walls. "Hurry," she hissed. Ethan jumped, caught her wrist, and pulled himself up just as shadow spilled into the canyon mouth below. Blackwood and two soldiers rode in slow, eyes scanning the rock. He dismounted, looking around, the tracker's instinct alive in him. He crouched near a footprint, Ethan's boot. "They're close," he said. "I can smell the smoke." Ethan pressed himself against the wall, motioning for silence. But Nantan, too young to understand the gravity, shifted, and a pebble dislodged, tumbling down the cliff. It struck the ground beside Blackwood's boot. He looked up. "Fire!" he barked. Bullets screamed through the canyon, stone chips flying. Ethan returned a shot, one soldier falling with a cry. Taya pulled Nantan tight against her body, shielding him. "Go!" Ethan shouted. "Climb higher." "I can't leave you," she cried. "You can if you want him safe." Blackwood's men reloaded. Dust filled the air. Ethan fired again, ducking behind a rock. One of the bullets grazed his shoulder, burning hot. Taya reached for him, eyes wide. "Ethan!" He smiled faintly, blood staining his shirt. "Just a scratch." "Give it up, Cole." Blackwood shouted. "You can't win this. Hand them over, and maybe I'll let you live." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You wouldn't know mercy if it bit you. Then die with them." More shots. The rock splintered inches from his head. He looked up the cliff. Taya was near the top, pulling Nantan with her. Sunlight cut through the dust, turning her hair into a halo of fire. He raised the rifle again, covering their escape. "Go!" he yelled, voice hoarse. And for the first time since he'd buried his wife, Ethan prayed. Not for himself, but for someone else to make it out alive. The last shot cracked through the canyon like thunder, and then silence. Only the smell of gunpowder and blood remained, drifting between the stones. Ethan pressed his back against a rock, breath shallow, shoulder bleeding. He could hear Taya climbing above, dragging Nantan to safety. He'd done what he came to do, bought them time. Now came the cost. Boots crunched on gravel. Blackwood's voice echoed, smooth and cold. "You got grit, Cole. I'll give you that. But grit doesn't beat the U.S. Army." Ethan pushed himself up, rifle trembling in his hands. "That's funny," he rasped. "I never fought for them." Blackwood stepped into view, rifle aimed low. His face was cut with shadow, eyes glinting like steel. "You could have been one of us," he said. "A scout, a man with purpose. Instead, you throw it all away for an Apache girl who ain't worth a dime." Ethan's lip curled. "You don't see worth in what you don't understand." "Maybe," Blackwood said, raising his gun. "But the colonel wants her alive. You he doesn't care about." Ethan's grip tightened. His vision tunneled. He could hear Taya's voice faintly from above, calling his name, raw with fear. Then Blackwood fired. The shot slammed into Ethan's side, spinning him backward. Pain burst white-hot, knocking the breath from his lungs. He fell hard, dust filling his mouth. Blackwood advanced slowly, savoring it. "You should have stayed out of this, rancher." Ethan coughed blood and smiled through it. "You talk too much." His hand found the revolver half buried beside him. He lifted it fast, one final motion born from rage and love and everything he'd lost. The shot echoed, sharp and close. Blackwood staggered, eyes wide. He looked down at the red blooming across his chest, then back up, surprise more than pain in his face. "You!" he gasped, then fell forward, hitting the dirt with a thud that didn't echo at all. Ethan's body sagged. The world blurred. He pressed his palm against the wound, but it was no use. The blood ran fast. Then footsteps. Soft, quick, desperate. Taya appeared, hair loose, eyes wild, Nantan clutching her skirts. She dropped beside Ethan, hands trembling. "No." "Ethan, stay with me." He smiled faintly. "Told you I'd get you safe." Her hands pressed against his wound. "No. You will live." He shook his head, breath rattling. "It's all right." She leaned close, voice breaking. "Why would you do this for me?" Ethan looked past her, to the boy, to the sky, to the light spilling gold over the canyon edge. "Because someone once told me, saving one life makes yours worth living." He coughed, the sound wet and small. "Guess I finally believed it." Taya's tears fell onto his face. She whispered something in Apache, a prayer, soft and melodic. The wind caught it and carried it away. His hand brushed her cheek, then stilled. The rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering softly on the rock. Later that night, the canyon was quiet again. The soldiers were gone, their horses scattered. The sky stretched endless and cold, a river of stars above the desert. Taya knelt beside a mound of fresh earth under a lone cottonwood tree. Ethan's hat rested atop the stones. His rifle lay beside it like an old friend. Nantan stood beside her, holding a single wildflower. "Will he wake again?" he asked quietly. Taya smiled through her grief. "In the next life, the spirits will guide him to the White River, where pain cannot follow." The boy nodded solemnly and placed a flower on the grave. Taya stood and looked at the horizon. Smoke rose faintly from the east, Fort Coronado, the place where Colonel Hale waited, still hunting what he could not possess. She tightened the strap of her pouch around her shoulder. The medicine her father taught her was safe. Ethan's sacrifice had bought her freedom and purpose. She turned west toward the mountains. "Come, Nantan," she said softly. "We will go where our people wait. We will heal what they tried to destroy." The boy took her hand, and together they began the long walk beneath the moon. Behind them, the desert wind moved through the cottonwood leaves, whispering like a man's voice, low, steady, carrying a promise. "Keep walking, little one. Keep walking." In the high valley beyond Mesilla, a woman tended to the sick. Her hut smelled of willow bark, sage, and smoke. Men came from miles away, settlers, soldiers, natives, all seeking the same miracle, healing. They called her the Willow Healer. None knew her name, but she carried it quietly in her heart. On her table lay a single object that did not belong to her world, a tarnished silver star, once worn by a rancher. She kept it beside a bowl of medicine herbs. Every night, she would touch it gently, whispering a few words before the fire. "Rest easy, Ethan Cole," she would say. "Your promised lives." In a land of forgotten mercy, a rancher remembered what it meant to be human. And somewhere, beneath the same sun, a girl, he say, began to heal the world.